It's there is no peace to the father. David will never have peace again, except in his old age. He'll have peace, but not through this period of time at all. Chapter 14 of 2 Samuel. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was inclined toward Absalom. He saw that he loved him, but David wouldn't call him back at all. He wouldn't call him back at all. He wouldn't do it. So now Joab tricks David. Now we have deceit. The last one is the results of sin, and now we have deceit. David's going to be plagued with deceit the rest of his life because he deceived Uriah. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, "Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days." Now you have to realize that David was a judge in Israel. As a king, he was a judge also. Then you go to the king and speak with him in this manner. So Joab put the words in her mouth. So now she's going to go to the king and as a judge. You know, the king just didn't sit on the throne all the time. The king was busy settling arguments among his people. Now when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, prostrated herself and said, "Help, O king, help me." And the king said to her, "What is your trouble?" Now she's quite an actress here. And David's going to see through this. And she answered, "Truly, I am a widow, for my husband is dead." He's lying. "And your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and there was no one to separate them, and the one struck the other and killed him. Now behold, the whole family has risen against your maidservant." And they said, "Hand over the one who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother, whom he killed, and destroy the heir also." Now this was her only hope of survival. A woman didn't have any hope except in her children or in her husband. They were totally dependent. "Thus they will extinguish my coal which is left, so as to leave my husband neither name nor remnant in the face of the earth." Then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you." And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, "O my lord the king, the iniquity is upon me and my father's house, but the king and his throne are guiltless." So the king said, "Whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and he will not touch you anymore." Then she said, "Please let the king remember the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood may not continue to destroy, lest they destroy my son." And he said, "As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Please let your maidservant speak a word to my lord the king." And he said, "Speak." And the woman said, "Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in speaking the word, the king is one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring back his banished one." It sure would have been a lot better if he didn't bring him back. "For we shall surely die, and like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away life, but plans ways so that the banished one may not be cast out from him. David's light bulbs are going on in his mind. Now the reason I've come to speak to you this word to my lord the king is because the people have made me afraid. So that your maidservant said, let me now speak to the king. Perhaps the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy both me and my son from the inheritance of God. Then your maidservant said, please let the word of my lord the king be comforting. For as an angel of God, so is my lord the king, to discern good and evil. And may the Lord your God be with you. And the king answered. And he said to the woman, please do not hide anything from me that I am about to ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king ask and speak. So the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? Joab. Joab was a great warrior of God. He was a vengeful man. And he was trying to help David in this way. But he was a problem child sometimes, and this time he was. And the woman answered and said, as your soul lives, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. Indeed, it was your servant Joab who was commanded me, and it was he who put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant. Again, here we have a woman that has been taken advantage of, haven't we? David could have killed her. Had her killed. He could have. In order to change the appearance of things, your servant Joab has done this. But my Lord is wise, like the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all that is upon the earth. And the king said to Joab, behold now, I will surely do this thing. Go before and bring back the young man Absalom. This was a bad mistake. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and prostrated himself and blessed the king. And then Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord, the king. And the king has performed the request of his servant. And Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. The story is not over yet. However, the king said, let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. So Absalom turned to his own house, did not see the king's face. He comes back, he's near his father, but now he's not going to still be in his presence. Now, in all Israel, no one was more handsome than Absalom. He is an absolute movie star type character. So highly praised, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and there was no defect in him, except in his heart, his soul. And when he cut his hair of his head, and it was at the end of every year that he cut it, he didn't get a haircut for a whole year. For it was heavy on him, so he cut it. And he weighed out the hair of his head. It was 200 shekels by the king's weight. It's heavy. And Absalom, there were born 3 sons. One daughter whose name was Tamar. And she was a woman of beautiful appearance. Now Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. He would not be in his presence. If David went out and went someplace, he could see him from afar, but he never had an audience with his father for 2 years. Now let's see the character of Absalom. Absalom means peace to the father, or the father of peace, but he is not. Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. So he sent again the second time, but he would not come. Now we're going to see how peaceful that Absalom is. Therefore he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and his barley there, go set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. That's a wicked deed, isn't it? Lost the whole field. Then Joab, he got Joab's attention now. He should have taken his sword with him. So Joab arose and came to Absalom in his house and said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent for you, saying, come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? I would have been better off to stay there. Now therefore let me see the king's face. If there is any iniquity in me, let him put me to death. Now he knew that his father wasn't going to put him to death. But Absalom is deceitful. Absalom is a sociopath. Absalom doesn't seem to honor his father at all. You know, one of the first commandment with a promise is what? Honor your father and your mother, for you can extend your life thereof. So Joab came to the king and he called for Absalom. Thus he came to the king and prostrated himself on his face to the ground, and the king kissed Absalom. So the king kissed Absalom. Now, can you imagine the scene for a moment? You know what kissing means? I did a message on kissing one time. You remember that, Marilyn? Maybe you weren't there. Sharon, do you remember that message I did on kissing? Yeah. When you kiss somebody, you leave yourself, you surrender yourself to them. When you kiss someone, you show your affection to them. Now, you remember Ronald Reagan? He was president. He was an actor also. But he went to Russia one time, and the Russian prime minister kissed him right in the mouth. Kissed him. He wasn't used to a man kissing him like that, but they do that over there. But now when Absalom came to his father kissed him right in the mouth. David opened himself up to problems when he did that, because he surrendered his will to him when he kissed him. Now let's see in the next message what happens. I'm taking time to read all these messages, and every one of them has a story. Every chapter in 2 Samuel here so far has quite a story in it. And this story here, let's go back, and this story here has no remorse in it. David did what he needed to do. Now David wrote some of the most beautiful songs of all. In Psalm 23, it's a very short little psalm. Maybe we look at that for just a moment. Now David wrote this psalm, and he wrote Psalm 51 also. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Now, as we go through this message, for the next few messages, I want you to remember that David did this. And David was trusting in God to keep him alive. His own family now, his own children would come after his life, try to kill him. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Now, David's idea of heaven was him being a sheep and God being the shepherd. And in some ways, we're all like sheep. We've all gone astray, but we all depend upon the Lord. He leads me beside quiet waters. You could take a sheep down here to this creek, Larry, and they wouldn't drink. Do you know that? Sheep won't drink from that creek. You have to make the water still because they're afraid of running water. There was a story a long time ago. It's a true story. Mr. Lopez, that Maryland's father knew, he worked for the Tone Ranch. And I can't remember, they had 50,000 sheep, I think it was. And he was driving these sheep, he was going to drive them all the way to Wyoming. And they hired this man that said he knew all this area. And they had him as a guide. Well, pretty soon, Lopez realized that this guy was nothing but full of hot air. He didn't know this area. He's lying. When he got up here to Fish Lake Valley, he had problems. From there on, he came up the Owens Valley. Of course, we have the water there in Owens Valley. We had Owens Lake at that time, and you could be on that lake and the sheep would drink. They could go on up and they'd get a place where the water was real still, and they'd water the sheep as they go, and they would graze the sheep as they went. This tremendous army of sheep. And he came down here in the Fish Lake Valley, and Fish Lake Valley was, at that time, Fish Lake was way down the valley. There was Cottonwood Creek, there was big ponds down there. You know, there wasn't very many farmers here at that time. This is a pretty wild country. Once they left Fish Lake Valley and got past Lida, it was Katy bar the door. It was rough from there on. Can you imagine, Larry, you've been over Lida Pass. And then you go to Lida Pass and you go toward Goldfield, all the way up in there. How much water do you see? Well, they got up there and that Lida Creek was running. But the sheep wouldn't drink from it at all. And Lopez took off on his horse, his trusty horse, and he had this dog with him. He went off looking because this guy didn't know what he's talking about. He realized this guy that was the guy. And while he was gone, he said, dig a ditch outside of that creek and where you got a quiet pond where that water will run in the pond where the sheep will drink. They won't drink in a river or in that creek. Do that. Well, he took off, kept looking as he rode those hills out there, all those Joshua trees and things out there. There was nothing. Total pond means a little bit of water, not much water, scarce of water. But they had to go way, way, way beyond that. Lopez was out riding that horse for days without food or drink. And he passed out from exhaustion. And the horse and the dog took him back to where the camp was and the sheep were. And the sheep were scattered all over the place because the guy didn't dig the ditch and build a pond. So when he got there, basically he just fell off his horse. And they revived him. And then he ordered them to dig the ditch and dig out a place for the sheep where they could drink beside quiet waters. That's necessary. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness. Does God do that in our lives? Yes, He does. For His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. Thy rod and Thy staff comfort me. And that rod and staff there, look at that. What's the difference between a rod and a staff?
Have a hook on the end.
The one's got a hook on the end of it. That's to catch sheep with when they get out of line. And the staff or the rod is for what? Whipping the sheep. and giving them a spanking to keep them in line. So David says, thank you for dragging me out of sin, and thank you for whooping me. That's what that means. They comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. A sheep will not eat if he's afraid. You have anointed my head with oil. That was a very high priced oil. You know, olive oil was more precious than gold. Gold won't keep you alive. Olive oil will. It's good medicine. It's good for your skin, everything. My grandfather, Amadeo Lamucci, my step-grandfather, he never used anything on his hair except olive oil. And he put it on his arms and everything. And he cooked with it. Star olive oil in 1 gallon can. Anointed my head with oil and my cup overflows. In other words, I have more than I need. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life. Now goodness, loving kindness is again one of the messianic titles. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What beautiful, beautiful music to our souls, huh? As David was going through all of this, maybe he remembered that psalm. I'm sure he lived that Psalm 51, where he repented unto God. David always knew that his God loved him. May we always remember that God loves us through all of our trials too, tribulations. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this message from your word. Please use it for our correction, for our love, for our comfort, as in the New Testament says, parables for our soul. Please touch each and every one of your children out there that are listening to these messages for your honor and glory. Please forgive me where I fail you. In Jesus' name.